It is time for a movie review. Haven't done one of these in a while. This is technically a documentary review. And this is one, if you're on this channel, definitely recommend this. In fact, I found this movie on YouTube, so I will link it on the end screen. If you have any issues finding it, otherwise just check the end screen. But this is America, Freedom to Fascism. And this is a movie a documentary all about the Federal Reserve. And I've only seen a couple of really good treatments of that subject of the Federal Reserve and the problems therein in really good documentaries. Sometimes it's touched on in other documentaries, but this is by, I believe, Aaron Russo. He was the producer of Trading Places, the Eddie Murphy movie from the 80s. And he did kind of a documentary, kind of a Michael Moore style documentary about the Federal Reserve. So for whatever you want to make of that part of it. But that was kind of the style he did of cornering some of the people about the Federal Reserve. And before I get too far into the meat of the film, let me just set the stage for how I saw it, because this is, I think this is a very interesting bit of historical information. So this was released in 2006. And in 2006, I can't remember the exact release date, but it was made in 2006. I might have seen it either end of 2006 or 2007, beginning of 2007. But I saw it at the Angelica Theater in Dallas, Texas. And the reason I'm telling you all this is the Angelica Theater back in the early 2000s, that was when it was kind of in its heyday, was known for bringing in a lot of offbeat documentaries and movies of all different stripes. And I suppose enough people had bugged them about bringing this film in that they did so. And so my now ex-wife and I went to go see it there. But that was the Angelica's claim to fame back then, was bringing in a lot of political films and indie films from all over. And that was where I saw a lot of the Pat Tillman documentary about what happened to him in Afghanistan. But just a lot of stuff that you would not ever see projected on any other screen anywhere. And they did a pretty good job of that, again, back in circa early 2000s. But when we went to go see this, and we got our seats and sat down, and before they started the movie, the owner of the Angelica Theater came out and gave us a quick explanation of the movie. And I've never witnessed anything like this ever in my life, before or after, where he explained what we were about to see was going to upset us. And we should be prepared for that. And basically encouraged us not to become violent and express ourselves in any kind of violent fashion after watching this. And I remember thinking, like, what on earth is going on? And at this point, my ex-wife is actually the one, to her credit, who explained the whole Federal Reserve System to me. And so I knew what I was going into, but I didn't realize how well he would articulate a lot of these points in the movie. So the owner of the theater literally came out and did a quick, and it was, they had a pretty full crowd. I think the theater was almost, if not totally full, of people watching this movie. And I don't know how many times they played it there during its run there, but and I don't know if the owner came out every time they did this, but basically just giving a disclaimer that this was going to piss us off and be careful. So, and then we watched the documentary, and then afterwards there was a lot of indie. This was when, this is before, right about the time YouTube had come around. And this was still when a lot of alternative press was in its infancy, especially on platforms like YouTube. And a lot of people that a lot of guys showed up to that screening with CD-ROMs of additional information. And that was the cool thing about it. It brought a lot of people out of the woodwork passing out information about websites people hadn't heard about. And back then, again, you were just getting handed business cards and stuff to look up. And some pretty cool stuff came up as a result of that. There was a lot of people looking into 9/11 at that event. And the sad thing about this documentary and at that time was I was coming at this, my wife at the time, she was pretty far right. And I was more left, more on the left, kind of moderate left side. So the whole Federal Reserve thing was just a mind-blowing thing for me to realize that the way the Fed operates. And one thing that's really frustrating about the issue of the Federal Reserve is it has been really labeled as and branded as kind of a right-wing issue or sometimes a libertarian issue, and it should be a left-wing and right-wing issue altogether. The Federal Reserve is something that everyone should be concerned about. If you spend US dollars, this should be a major issue to you. But unfortunately, it has wound up being typically seen as a right-wing thing. And typically, it's also put into that same category as tax evasion of, oh, the people that they're tax protesters or whatever. And it's not, so it's seen as this very narrow spectrum of typically Republican or libertarian kind of thinking of the people concerned about the Federal Reserve, when it should be everybody. It should be literally everyone at the pulse that uses US dollars should be concerned about this. So, the movie is about, and this is one of those frustrating things, I can't wave around a documentary. So again, I'll put a link at the end of this video to the documentary, because thankfully now it is available on the YouTube. And Aaron Russo sadly has passed away. And I think he knew, there were rumors that he knew he was terminal and deliberately made this as kind of his parting shot, leaving this mortal coil, that this was his effort to strike a point for humanity. So big thanks to him for that. And the whole point of the movie is to explain the way the Federal Reserve works, how it works, and the effects of it, and all the other corruption things that come out as a result of that. And it's funny that I was actually getting ready to do this review, and this morning I saw a comment come across one of the videos about the Federal Reserve, because I had mentioned it in a previous video. And someone said, yeah, the Federal Reserve is the issue. And that's true. It doesn't matter whether or not you want to protest income tax or not. Once you understand the way the Federal Reserve works, you realize that that is such a profound level of corruption that is, until that's extracted, then you cannot have honest government until that is removed. And basically that's what Aaron Russo does in the course of the documentary, is explain, this is one of the hardest truths for a lot of people to accept, is income tax does not pay for anything. Income tax, now let me make this clear. This is a tricky thing to explain. Income tax, when you get your paycheck and you see it broken down, all your federal withholdings, that is not the income tax. The income tax is the actual monetary part of that goes to the Federal Reserve, but the federal withholdings and things like that for different programs and stuff like unemployment tax and all that is not to be confused with the income tax. So you have to look at your leave and earnings statement or whatever to see that exact line item. But it gets buried in all that, and because of that, there's a lot of deliberate, it's deliberately obscured in that, so that there's a lot of confusion about that. But the actual income tax, the actual part, not federal withholdings, not unemployment tax, not Social Security withholdings or anything like that, but the actual income tax, the sole purpose of that is to pay for the debt on the use of the US dollar. So the Federal Reserve is owned by member banks. And I can tell you all this, I'm not any kind of spoiler alert, because probably if you're on this channel, you probably already know this, but if you want to see a really good breakdown, definitely go to the end screen and click on that link. But the way the Federal Reserve works, it is a banking cartel. It is private banking families who have established this, as a way to charge interest on the use of the US dollar. So the way it works now is the Federal Reserve is what authorizes the printing of the US dollar, and we actually pay interest on the use of the US dollar to the Federal Reserve in the form of income tax. And then, of course, that's where you have the whole thing of mortgage-backed securities and things like that that all spin off of that. But the actual income tax is not paying for the military, it's not paying for roads, and Aaron Russo does a great job of showing where all those other taxes go to. When I pay my property tax for this house, my property tax goes to the county to support the county. And when I buy gas at the gas pump, that tax money that's on every gallon of gas is paying for the roads that I use. The corporate tax pays for the military. All those other things go to something tangible, whether you like it or not, or whether you agree with it or not. All those other taxes go to those specific things, whereas income tax is solely for the purpose of propping up the Federal Reserve and the interest rate on the use of the dollar. And first time I ever heard about this or really understood it, and it pissed me off, frankly, when I heard about it. I was like, wow, this is really corrupt. And I was explaining this to an artist friend of mine as we were sculpting together. And he said, well, the reason we have the Federal Reserve and the reason we went off the gold standard is, duh, you don't want to carry a giant sack of gold around. And I thought, that's really dumb, because that's not, and I was trying to explain to him that that's not gold. It's not that we're getting rid of gold coins. It's the money is not backed by anything. That paper money was backed by gold. It's not that this wasn't an issue of transferring to paper money. The whole idea was going off the gold standard to the Federal Reserve is now it is literally a stroke of a pen by the Federal Reserve that is not a branch of the government that decides the value of the US dollar. So you could have $20 in your bank account, and that can be changed by I think what they call the M3 aggregate, by how much money is put out into the money supply. And it's the same reason that we don't allow counterfeit money, is the best way to explain this to your friends and family that are wondering about this. It's like, why isn't counterfeiting money illegal? Or why isn't it illegal? And the reason counterfeiting money is illegal is it destabilizes the currency. If you have a finite amount of money, so let's say you're playing Monopoly, and someone comes in and adds additional money, just gives money to all the players, you're going to have a really exciting round of play for a while, because while that money is in there floating around, people are going to be able to buy it, property and everything else, until you realize now you have more currency than assets available on the board. And the only way to compensate for that is inflation, is to raise the prices. And that's exactly what happens. So same thing if you were to just counterfeit a bunch of money, and you were to counterfeit like $1 million $20 bills and dump them into the US money supply. That's what would happen. For a while, the first people to get their hands on that money, those are the people that will have the spending power of those counterfeit bills. But by the time it trickles down, so to speak, that will lose its value, because now, again, you have more paper money than goods. And the only way to compensate for that is raising the prices on all the goods and services. And that's basically what we saw through COVID, was a great example of that. And by that point, I was well versed in that. And I was trying to explain to a lot of customers and friends at the time, I'm like, this is bad news. All this money that's being printed through all the people that are on unemployment and all these subsidies and all this free money being handed out is greatly devaluing the currency and knocking it down. And all that happens is you have this brief moment of this big spending spree, and that's that boom and bust cycle. And in that moment, that's where really wealthy people go in and buy up a lot of assets, because they know exactly what's going on and they exploit that. And by the time that money makes it down to the little guy, then suddenly you realize, wait, before I was able to buy a combo meal at McDonald's for $3.99, now it's $15. Like, how did this happen? Well, it happened not because the combo meal became more valuable. It didn't happen because McDonald's employees demanded higher pay. It happened because the goods and services were devalued by too much currency. And once you understand that, and that that's the way the Federal Reserve works, that there's literally nothing backing that piece of paper, and that's why it says Federal Reserve note. It's not, there's no gold or silver, anything backing that. It is only backed by the ability of Congress to levy tax against the U.S. population. Now, it is fascinating. The documentary goes way more into this than I want to get into here, but about the income tax and how income tax works and the legality of income tax and all that. But I think for any person using the US dollar, once you understand that, you realize that what that's resulted in is a lot of the left and right bickering, where people accuse, oh, it's the rich doing this, or oh, it's the poor demanding more money, when in reality, it is a banking cartel flooding your money supply with more money that should be there, and then using that as a way to control or set prices or to deliberately create inflation. So once you know that, you stop blaming the guy that wants more money, because he wants more money because he realized the last guy in line, it's a Ponzi scheme. Once the last guy in line realizes suddenly the money he got that trickled down to him doesn't buy what it used to buy just a few months ago. So he's going to want more money. So this is why the whole idea of having a higher minimum wage or whatever, that will never fix the problem, because unless you say, okay, we're going to do this on a percentage scale where a loaf of bread will always be, 30% of an hourly wage or something like that. That would be the only way you could really fight that. But I guarantee you the lizard people would never be cool with that. And when I say lizard people, let me say for the new people to the channel, I don't actually believe in shape-shifting lizard people, but I also wouldn't be shocked if tomorrow somebody told me shape-shifting lizard people are occupying the White House. I don't think I'd really be all that surprised. But I say lizard people as a placeholder for high-functioning corporate psychopaths. Let's just say that. So, but anyway, once you understand that how our money system works and how the Federal Reserve, we are paying to use our own money system, then you start to understand Andrew Jackson, for all his flaws, was one of the guys that fought the bank and actually won. And you start to see all the times in history where a central bank has been fought against by honest politicians in our country. And in 1913, they finally won. And then, of course, we followed by World War I and World War II, because once you have a central bank and you have basically a private entity skimming off money off your entire money supply, it requires this beast be constantly fed with more things in order to keep it going. And he quotes I think it's Meyer Rothschild, who said, "Give me control of a nation's money and I care not who makes the laws." So excellent information about that. And I'm going to wrap it up with just this one thing about the voting part. He also talks about the Diebold machines and the scandal therein. And this is another one of those partisan things that shouldn't be a partisan thing. Back then, if you're my age, I'm in my early 50s, and if you're my age or older or maybe around my age, you might remember the 2004 election, but especially the 2006 election. Both of those were marked by serious controversy around the Diebold voting machines and those machines and how easy they were to hack. And back then, it was all people on the left that were rightly upset about how easy these machines were to hack into and switch the votes. And there were all kinds of reports coming out in real time of election, all kinds of stuff of people seeing their votes actually switched right in front of them. And there were people demanding like a paper receipt so they could do a manual recount if you're going to use these machines. And Diebold said, "Oh no, we can't do that." And everybody's like, "Why can't you?" Because your Diebold ATMs give me a paper printout when I go to withdraw $40 cash. So why can't you make a paper receipt for a voting machine? So if you had to, you could do a manual recount. But evidently that was too much to ask for. But that whole scandal of Diebold and all the very real voting fraud that happened in both 2004 and then 2006, and Freedom to Fascism talks about the 2006 election and some of the fraud therein. And that's a great time capsule of a lot of that just in and of itself. But fast forward to the Dominion scandal and everything that happened in 2020, and you see all that happening all over again. Only this time it was on the right. And because people have been so polarized against each other, the people on the left had amnesia about 2006, and the people on the right had amnesia about that and forgot, hey, wait a second, we've seen this movie. And the frustrating thing about that is we need to stop looking at, it's a matter of, well, you're saying Trump should be in office, or you're saying Al Gore should be in office, or John Kerry. That's not the point. The point is, if the system is rigged, that is a massive problem. And we're not even talking, we're past the point of talking about professional wrestling status politicians. This is, if you can control the vote, then and you can rig the election that way. And I apologize, there goes my clock again. Obviously, you have to throw the election process has been severely and totally compromised. So the whole Dominion voting thing, the Diebold voting thing, that's one of those issues that I kept trying to remind my friends on the left and the right. That was like, guys, we've been through this before. We went through this with the Diebold machines. And back then, it was purely a left-leaning issue, and the people on the right got all upset. Y'all are just upset you lost the election. And then we saw the same thing happen with people on the left saying, oh, y'all are just upset you lost the election, when in reality, there should be massive concern that it's happening at all. It shouldn't matter. At that point, party affiliation should go out the window. And funny personal story around that time of the 2020 election. I had a customer who was very much on the left side of the aisle, and her husband worked in a capacity that he was seeing some of these voter fraud cases in one of the local counties around the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And she was actually genuinely upset because her husband was actually seeing some of these cases, personally prosecuting some of these cases, while she was listening to NPR that was telling her this was all made up. And she realized that it was not all made up. So it's just to bring it all back home here to wrap it up. Freedom to Fascism is one of those movies that should not be seen as a Republican documentary or a libertarian documentary. This is something that I think we would all do well to see. And I think people on the left are reluctant to explore this topic because they see it as an attack on taxation. And there is a role for taxes in modern society. I have no problem with that. I mean, again, every time I fill up my tank with gas, I don't swear at the gas pump and say taxation is theft. I understand that 18 cents or so per gallon is paying for the roads. And the more I drive on the roads, the more taxes I pay, and it's proportional to my use of the public roads. So I totally get that. I have no problem paying for my taxes for what I'm using. Here, when I'm paying my property taxes, I understand that I'm paying for my local law enforcement presence. I'm paying for my fire department. All those things need to be funded somehow. So I totally get that. What we're dealing with the Federal Reserve is a totally different animal. And once you realize that your income tax is not paying for any of the services you use, then the gloves should come off and the partisan hat should come off. And you should realize that, hey, wait a second, I shouldn't be mad at the Republicans. I shouldn't be mad at the Libertarians. I need to be mad at the corrupt individuals, these banking cartels that are doing this, that have subverted my democracy. So I will leave it there. So hopefully, if you are curious, definitely click on the link at the end. I don't get anything from that. It's not a paid documentary. It's free. It's right out there on the YouTube. But again, I think it's one of those things, it would behoove everybody with a pulse, anyone spending US dollars, to watch that documentary and have a much better understanding of how that system works. Because as someone mentioned this morning, that is really the issue. Until you address that, the cancer that is the Federal Reserve, which is not federal, until you address that, you're going to have a lot of attendant corruption that all comes out of that. So really, they were right. The commenter this morning, wish I could credit you accordingly, but that is true. Until you address the problem that is the Federal Reserve, all these other things will continue on as they always have. So you have to first rip out the funding. Now, one last thing before I totally wrap it up, a word about comments. I'm trying to stay up on comments. I've had a lot of new subscribers and new members to the channel. I appreciate your support of the channel. I always appreciate reading suggestions and just suggestions about the content of the videos and what's going on in the world. Love to hear all of that. Love to see the discussions in the comment section. But unfortunately, I am not being notified by YouTube of probably even half the comments that are popping up. So I've tried to stay on that and be in there and moderate and answer some of your questions and comments and things. But unfortunately, I'm not seeing probably even a fraction of the comments that are actually popping up there. And it could just be the sheer volume. I don't know. But just rest assured, I'm trying to get in there and see as many comments and suggestions as possible and respond when possible. But that is getting more difficult as the channel grows. So big thanks to all of you who have joined the channel and joined the madness here, and all the new subscribers and everything. Really appreciate it, and hope you all are appreciating the content. I try to keep this very minimal. I'm not trying to dazzle anybody with crazy graphics. This is all about the information, not the clever presentation. So again, thanks for supporting the channel, and hope you are all having a great Thanksgiving weekend.